watching live from Paris here on France 24. These are our headlines. Paris and 8 other French cities going into curfew. More restrictions put in place as cases of COVID-19 continue to rise. France not the only European country struggling to slow the spread of the virus. Gatherings of more than 4 people now banned in Thailand. An emergency decree passed as protests calling for constitutional change continue. And a third week of violence with renewed clashes across the region of Nagorno-Karabakh and beyond. A ceasefire breached with Russia and Turkey holding talks on the situation. But also coming up in this edition, our focus report will be taking us to Argentina, with 40% of the population living below the poverty line. Thousands of families have been pushed out of the capital and are now setting up shanty towns across the countryside. A curfew imposed in Paris and 8 other cities in France, starting Saturday, and for the next 6 weeks, people have to be home before 9 p.m. and stay there until 6 a.m. unless they have a valid essential reason to do otherwise. Limits have also been put on the number of people that can meet together at any time, 6 being the maximum size of a group. Catherine Bennett brings us the full details of the latest restrictions.
France will still be dealing with COVID-19 in the summer of next year. That was the message from France's President Emmanuel Macron as he took to primetime national television to announce new measures to battle the virus. The country will impose a curfew from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. in Paris and other hard-hit regions.
Un couvre-feu qui va s'appliquer à la région Île-de-France, où le virus circule très activement, et à plusieurs métropoles, à 8 métropoles en plus de la région Île-de-France, les métropoles, je dis bien, de Grenoble, Lille, Lyon, Aix-Marseille, Montpellier, Rouen, Saint-Étienne et Toulouse.
The government also stopped short of imposing travel restrictions, as long as citizens don't travel after curfew without a valid reason. The curfew will apply for an initial 4 weeks, but the Macron government will ask Parliament to extend that to 6. It means that all restaurants, concert halls, theatres and bars have to close at 9 p.m. Those who break the rules risk a fine of €135. As the UK has done before it, France is applying a rule of 6. No more than 6 people can gather together in private or public. But Macron was keen to stress that the country's economy would keep motoring along.
C'est très important, j'insiste là-dessus. Le travail va continuer dans toutes ces métropoles et ces régions. Les associations vont continuer de fonctionner pour s'occuper des plus précaires. Les services publics vont continuer à fonctionner. C'est indispensable.
He announced extra economic help to all sectors affected by the curfew, such as tourism, culture, and the country's bars and restaurants.
Well, among the worst hit countries on the continent, Macron's ability to rein in the pandemic could well define the remainder of his presidency and prospects for re-election in 2022. To take a look at the situation today and the longer-term potential impact, we're joined by our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, Emmanuel Macron, in March, he talked about fighting the war that is COVID-19. Today, is he still at the same place?
He's not using the same war-like language, but what is clear is that this COVID-19 comeback, not just in France, but across Europe, has put a lot of leaders, and Emmanuel Macron prominent among them, on the back foot, and basically back in a place that they really had hoped not to have to be in. Emmanuel Macron, you know, was elected on an ambitious agenda of reforms. He had been hoping really to be able to concentrate and push forward with that. And also, he had been hoping to focus on the economic recovery. Let's not forget the French government had a €100 billion recovery plan. Instead, it's not quite back to square one, but it's back to sort of a very defensive posture. Emmanuel Macron has been desperate, along with other European leaders, not to resort to another nationwide shutdown, fearing that could really wreck an already devastated economy. So he's been forced to go back into new restrictions, hoping hoping that somewhere along the way, new testing, better tracing, better isolation will bring the numbers down from what has been in France, well over 20,000 cases a day on many days of the past week. And over the past week alone, France reporting more than 120,000 new cases. The main takeaways, I would say, from this are Macron is trying to reassure, first of all, saying, look, it's not out of control. We still have the ability to tame this, to rein it in. Does he actually believe that? Who knows? Also trying to tell the French, look, we're not alone in this. Europe's also struggling a lot. I think that Macron perhaps is an inner resentment that he feels like he's taking a lot of heat from French who are prone and inclined to gripe and complain a lot, whereas other leaders who have an equally tough problem as him and France are not getting as bad a rap. Trying to send that message that a lockdown would be disproportionate, that he's trying to also make sure that social sectors and workers in parts of the economy that will be most effective will continue to receive some sort of palliative, some sort of aid to make this a little easier to get through, and also trying to not give the French any illusions that this is going to be over tomorrow, saying that the virus is really going to stay with us until at least next summer. And that's very much in line, Eve, with what he's been saying all along, that we must begin to live with this virus.
But Doug, how does France compare with its neighbours?
Not too favorably. It's not the worst. You could really put, and I'm looking, it's hard to compare numbers and you have to be careful to do apples to apples. It's not, I don't think, the most important thing, the number of cases per day, but look at the number of cases relative, the positive cases relative to, the population and per 1 million population. That's a key figure. If you're going to look at the number of cases out of a million population, Spain is still the worst, over 20,000 cases per million. You have Belgium way up there, over 15,000. And then you have France in third place, really, just under 12,000 cases per 1 million population. Now, let's not forget, France has 67 million people. And given that population, it right now does have one of the worst new infection rates in the entire world. So it's not doing well. It's not doing the worst. The UK, Ireland, also not doing well. Other countries resorting to a lot of lockdowns, curfew-style restrictions, closing bars and restaurants early, whether we're talking about from Prague to Berlin, in England, in Liverpool, where Boris Johnson has been resorting to lockdowns, limited types of lockdowns. So all of Europe is struggling with this right now, with very few exceptions. It's rampant across Europe. Emmanuel Macron, though, is in a very tough position, perhaps because France, along with some other countries, was complacent during the summer. And during those summer months, he had a lot of French traveling, moving around, people coming from other places in Europe into France. You could say that a lot of those countries are right now paying the price for, in a sense, letting their guard down or not being as vigilant during those summer months when, yes, numbers did come down, but now they are coming back with a vengeance because COVID does not give up that easily.
Douglas Herbert, thanks a lot for that. Well, as Douglas was mentioning there, one of the worst hit countries is Spain. Their bars and restaurants are shutting up shop for at least the next 2 weeks. A move that has, however, outraged those in the industry. They say the economic impact will be too much to bear. Kari's Garland brings us the latest from there.
Chanting no to the closure and banging on pots and pans. Hospitality workers took to the streets to express their anger after Catalan authorities ordered bars and restaurants to shut for at least 15 days, except for takeaway and delivery services.
Lo único que tenemos que hacer es trabajar, trabajar y trabajar, no estar cerrado. Tenemos que estar abiertos siempre para poder activar la economía, si no es imposible, inviable. Es inviable.
Seguramente será la ruina de la empresa y de muchas de ellas.
It's the first time restaurants and bars have closed since the central government's state of alarm came to an end in June. Spain has implemented other restrictions, though, including a partial lockdown of Madrid and nearby suburbs last week. The country has recorded more than 900,000 cases of COVID-19 and 33,000 deaths. Catalan authorities say the new measures are necessary to protect the region's healthcare system.
És una mesura dolorosa, ho sabem. Dolorosa també pel sector, dolorosa pels treballadors, pels empresaris del sector. Ho comprenem i prendrem també mesures per acompanyar-los en aquest esforç col·lectiu. Però és una mesura necessària. I necessària si no volem que la pandèmia s'extengui encara més ràpid de com ho està fent ara.
In addition to the closures, authorities are urging Catalan residents to work from home and limit social gatherings, while gyms, large shopping centres and cultural events must now operate at a limited capacity.
Groups of more than 4 people have been banned in Thailand, and the limit is not for health but political reasons. Ongoing protests pushing for constitutional reform has seen thousands take to the streets with regular clashes with the police. Online posts that are deemed to be a threat to national security have also now been outlawed. Kari Scarland tells us more and takes a look at the latest rally that ended with an overnight sit-in at government buildings.
Police in riot gear move in on protesters, disrupting a sit-in at Government House in Bangkok. Some try to resist, but are ultimately forced to leave. They had turned out in their thousands to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and a new constitution.
เสียใจครับผมที่ครั้งนี้ผมมา3 ครั้งละแต่ก็ยังไม่ได้ประชาธิปไตยที่แท้จริงของประชาชนกลับคืนมา
The police operation came within 30 minutes of an emergency decree banning gatherings of more than 4 people. To justify the measure, the government pointed to growing disorder, economic damage, coronavirus risks, and protesters' obstruction of a royal motorcade on Wednesday. During the incident, demonstrators held up 3-fingered salutes at the Queen's limousine in a gesture of defiance. Such overt criticism of the monarchy has caused controversy. The royal institution is considered sacred in Thailand.
ระบบกษัตริย์อยู่เบื้องหลังทางการเมืองถึงจะเปลี่ยนรัฐบาลกี่ครั้งแต่ถ้าระบบกษัตริย์ยังอยู่เบื้องหลังก็ไม่สามารถก้าวหน้าไปได้มากกว่านี้ค่ะ
Thailand has endured long bouts of political unrest and more than a dozen successful military coups since 1932. Protesters say Prayut, a former army general who took power in a 2014 coup, was returned to the leadership unfairly in last year's general election after laws were changed to favour a pro-military party.
Let's take a look now at some other news in brief. EU leaders are set to discuss Brexit at a summit this Thursday. So far, the 27 have tried to keep that topic off summit agendas, leaving negotiations to Michel Barnier. But with London repeating its demand for a sign of movement on some key issues, the summit is expected to note that not enough progress has been made to make a deal and to call for talks to intensify. Meanwhile, the EU has agreed to impose sanctions on Russia over the poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. 6 people and 1 company targeted by travel bans and acid freezes. This after French, German and Swedish laboratories all confirmed that Navalny was poisoned by the Novichok nerve agent. And Bolivians are gearing up for presidential elections amidst the country's worst economic crisis in decades, with GDP there set to shrink by over 6% this year. And yet it's the country's former economy minister, Luis Arce, who is leading in opinion polls. His main challenger is a centrist, Carlos Mesa. Heavy fighting continues with new attacks over the separatist territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. A 3rd week of violence despite a ceasefire having been brokered. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke on the phone to his Turkish counterpart, insisting on the need to get both sides to respect the truce. Russia has a defence pact with Armenia, while Turkey supports Azerbaijan. Salam Jean brings us up to date with the latest from there.
Loading the magazine of a new rifle. Putting aside work to be a volunteer recruit in a militia. With houses destroyed and rockets stuck in fields in the Martuni region of Nagorno-Karabakh, life for these ethnic Armenian residents has taken a violent turn in the past 3 weeks.
Первый раз в своей жизни вот этой ерундой занимаюсь. Еще никогда в жизни я не заряжал.
Это наш хлеб. Since September 27th, hundreds have been killed in this disputed region as Armenian separatists and Azerbaijan battle out the sovereignty of Nagorno-Karabakh. Despite a Moscow-brokered humanitarian truce, fighting continues in the worst regional dispute since a 1994 ceasefire, a long-simmering conflict that could escalate into a wider one, with Azerbaijan accusing Armenia of attacking its pipelines. and Armenia accusing Azerbaijan of trying to seize control of the territory. Meanwhile, the wounded keep coming into local hospitals seeking medical help.
I will stay here until we will win, until the last soldier and the citizen will need their help.
Armenia's prime minister said the country had suffered significant casualties, but that despite the losses of manpower and equipment, Armenian forces were still in general control in the Nagorno-Karabakh region.
Well, turning now to a very different story, and it's a world record for any printed work of literature. A book has been bought for just shy of $10 million. The text is a rare tome from 1623, and it brought together William Shakespeare's plays for the very first time. It's one of only 6 known complete copies in private hands.
To bid or not to bid, it wasn't a question for the winning buyer on Wednesday in New York. A private collector bought a first folio, or a compilation, of William Shakespeare's works for a whopping $9.97 million. Christie said it was the highest amount ever paid for a work of literature. Even if the bard once wrote, "All that glitters is not gold," this manuscript is rare. 235 copies of it exist, but only a handful are complete and in pristine condition.
This copy is a complete copy. That means it has all of its pages, and that's very unusual in that Shakespeare was read and read and read, and so many copies, the vast majority of copies, are imperfect. And this is the first time in a generation that a complete copy has come on the market.
Dating back to 1623, the book was published 7 years after Shakespeare's death, in a marriage of true minds, by his actors and friends. The compilation of 36 plays includes 18, which prior to the first folio had never been published. Without it, as King Lear said, nothing will come of nothing, and masterpieces like Macbeth and Julius Caesar would likely have been lost. Instead, the first folio helped Shakespeare's work gain in stature, allowing, as the bard said, friends, Romans, countrymen to lend their ears and to allow his works to play on.
So, thank you, Fernando.
You're watching